Moving on, the next topic that we'll address is all fibers fit, delineating the physiological effects with multiple fibers, and this will be Julie Jones from St. Catherine's University. And what we're going to address here is that, obviously, dietary fiber is beneficial to health. How do consumers achieve their recommended intakes, meeting those intakes but still staying within caloric recommendations? And how do consumers receive all the benefits that are currently being attributed to dietary fiber? Julie?
I am an advisor to the ILSI Carbohydrate Committee, and I do consult to a variety of companies. I think he told you what I was going to talk about. The way I'm going to talk about it is I'm going to take fiber benefits that have, where papers have occurred since most of them since the 2010 meeting, and many of them have been brought up today. So I'm going to talk about the synergy of fibers and the importance of innate and added fibers to fill the fiber gap. Well, these are the Vahouny 9 that you've heard about, so I'm going to talk about them in order that we listed them in the paper. In terms of epi data, I mean, we have really good epi data here that, and interventional data to show that fiber reduces blood lipids. In this case, it's beta-glucan, and we have a variety of fibers that do that, and amounts that are specified by regulation. And this is not just the FDA, but it's EFSA, FSANS, some of the Southeast Asia authorities as well. So, and it in terms of getting these health claims, it required both interventional and observational data. In terms of new interventional data, I'll just pick 4. These are all 12-week studies. You can complain about the studies. They may or may not be in Nicola's database, but just to give you an example of things that have occurred, there's a resistant starch type 4. When it replaced flour, it reduced blood cholesterol in those with metabolic syndrome. Soy flour, replacing flour in biscuits, decreased LDL cholesterol in overweight and obese college students. And a very unusual fiber, persimmon tannin-rich fiber cookie with 3 to 5 grams of fiber decreased LDL significantly. We obviously don't have significant scientific agreement on that latter fiber. But in any event, what I tried to show was just that the data keep coming, and the data are continuing to show that either the fiber on its own or replacement affected reduction of lipid. If we look at the next one, postprandial glucose, we have a Japanese study that came out in 2013 showing the associational data of dietary fiber with reduced fasting plasma glucose and reduced hemoglobin A1C, and a variety of other better measures that would improve diabetes control and obesity. We also have health claims from from EFSA on inulin and FOS can lower blood sugar. We have consumption of drinks with indigestible carbohydrates, which replacing the sugar induce lower blood glucose rise. Consumption of arabinoxylan contributes to the reduction of glucose after a meal, and the replacement of available starch with 14 grams of resistant starch helps to minimize the blood glucose. And then in U.S., we have a structure function claim saying that psyllium helps to maintain a healthy blood sugar. So we have a variety of government organizations recognizing the effect of fiber on blood glucose. This is a recent study on in diabetics, a little bit older, feeding partially hydrolyzed guar gum in a randomized controlled trial. And here you show a small reduction in hemoglobin A1C along with the change in waist circumference. This is a study with a meta-analysis by Susan Tosh looking at the net of 34 studies to show that beta-glucan decreased the glycemic response, an average of 48 millimoles. She did show that intact foods are more effective than some processed foods, so again, that you may or may not have captured in your database, because they looked at both together. Beta-glucan, 4 grams of it could drop it by about 27 grams, so you'll notice it wasn't as effective as the oat or barley beta-glucan, depending on how much you had. but added fiber was effective, and that's what Susan concluded in this. Also, looking at appetite control and blood pressure, that's blood pressure decreased in hypertensive subjects with beta-glucan, and there was a change in the visual analog score that Claudine mentioned this morning, as well as changed gut hormones in terms of appetite control. So that was one of the blood pressure ones. In terms of epi studies and blood pressure, a study in France with about 1,968 people showing that fiber and whole grain food reduced blood pressure. So again, we have the epi data, the Korean and Hange showing that intakes of fiber was inversely related to blood pressure. So we have some interventional and some epi studies. If we look at, and I put these together, fecal bulking and transit time. So we already have in Health Canada, a fourth of a cup of product X contains 7 grams of wheat bran, which promotes regularity. So we have that being recognized in by some countries. We do know, and this is just, you've seen several different renditions of this over the past 3 days, that fiber and does affect fecal bulking with wheat bran and psyllium having a greater effect than some of the more soluble fibers, which are usually fermented. In terms of colonic fermentation and short-chain fatty acid and modulation of colonic microflora, we've heard a lot about that over the last 3 days and some very elegant talks. As we know that fiber does impact the speed of digestion, and we've talked about how it both slows it up and speeds it up. It does lower the pH in the colon, and maybe we need a review to show that that lowering in pH really is associated with some health outcomes, and I think we can actually do that. It produces byproducts that are physiologically important, and I think Canada has recognized that, and it impacts the immune system, and we've heard data on that as well. Diet does have an impact on the species and the fermentation in the colon, and we heard a lot of data about that as well. These fermentations, it's amazing the number of people that quoted this Devater story. I think 4 or 5 different people, starting with the very first day, this 2014 study by Devater on how some of these metabolic products of short-chain fatty acids actually had an effect on glucose homeostasis and affected propionate and butyrate, and we've heard a lot about that, and metabolic control in terms of body weight and blood glucose. This study is on blends, and I'm a big, I think it's like we need all the vitamins for a healthy diet, and we need them all in the right amount. And I think these data just show that various blends can do different things, and sometimes they act to amplify, and sometimes they act to slow things down. For instance, GAS with fibers increase the bifidobacteria. So I think that's a problem in translating some of the individual data that we fed an isolated fiber, because we're generally eating a mix of things. But nonetheless, in some cases, we see both synergy and inhibition. In terms of fermentation, it has the ability to produce gas, and some fibers are better at it than others. And and all fibers produced did not. In this particular study, all the fibers produced similar amounts of short-chain fatty acids, but the rate of production was different, and where they were released in the GI tract is different, and therefore they may feed different parts of the colon. Again, feeding my argument that we need a variety of kinds of fibers to do this well. So getting gas is a good thing. And so then in terms of weight loss and weight maintenance and the reduction of adiposity and satiety, I put those together. Perhaps I shouldn't have. This is a study on short-chain fatty acids, various short-chain fatty acids that were the result of the diet. You can see that some of the short-chain fatty acids actually did reduce blood glucose and body weight in this particular study. So we are having a little trouble with gas, and maybe it's a good thing. This is a study that was not done after, this was done during 2010. It's an EPIC subset with about 90,000 Europeans. And again, you know that the drill here, total dietary fiber and cereal fiber was inversely associated with weight and waist circumference change. And fruit and vegetable was only, fiber was associated with waist circumference change, not necessarily weight. But fiber, so we should be jumping on the scales, and instead of saying perhaps it's too much of this, maybe it's too little fiber. Here's an intervention study where they substituted, it's a randomized controlled trial where they substituted soy fiber in terms of a breakfast biscuit, which might be eaten in parts of Europe, and you can see that all of the measures they had in terms of body mass index, waist circumference, body and trunk fat decreased, as well as things that you might see associated with that decrease in weight also coming down. And so that reminds me, did you buy the tofu? Maybe we need the tofu and the fiber that it contains. EFSA does allow a claim about fiber and weight loss, and it says it recommends that you need at least 1 gram of glucomannan 3 times a day with a glass of water in order to lose weight as part of a calorie-controlled diet. So we do have evidence that, again, some of these substances are being used by various government bodies. This is an evidence-based review that Joanne did, and she mentioned earlier. Here, the satiety data, I think, is really, really difficult, and I think Joanne really mentioned how difficult that was. But basically, the satiety data are difficult because in her meta-analysis, and this is sort of my reading of the data as well, is that you find a study that says it works and a study that says it doesn't. And maybe, Fred, to your point, it's was it a high molecular weight or low molecular weight, or did we cook it or not cook it? But only 40% showed a decrease in the subjective appetite scores, which are kind of squishy anyway. And then when they actually measured the intake, only 20%, just slightly more than 20% of the fibers did that, studies with fiber. The ones that were most likely to be cited more than once were the beta-glucan, rye bran, lupin, and whole grain rye. So maybe we need a tastier alternative or a better way to measure satiety. So then there's things beyond the Vahouny 9, and that's what I hope we can talk about today, is what with the evidence map that based a database and evidence map on the fibers of the Vahouny 9. But we also heard some wonderful things here in the last 3 days about mineral absorption. We heard about immunity, much more data on the microbiome and changing. And so how can we capture that? And do we want to make the Vahouny 9 an even larger group of criminals or whatever? This is just there's a lot of data on fermentation and calcium absorption, and we show the fermentation causing the short-chain fatty acids, lowering the pH, and increasing a variety of minerals to be absorbed. We saw data the last 2 days on calcium, and data where the data actually show that it increased bone mass density in both adolescent and elderly, and also change in the types of organisms. So we need to use that fiber database, and it will help us get between good information and the worthless, and lead us in the right spot. And why do we need to do that? Well, because, as I mentioned on the first day, the intakes all over the world are below recommendations, and the U.S. has the dubious distinction of being among the lowest in the world, and we need to do something about that. And we need to be able to help consumers because they are worried, they're afraid of the names of isolated fibers. Polydextrose sounds really nefarious. And, well, first of all, it's got dextrose in it, and we're supposed to avoid sugar. And now I got polys of those, and that sounds like a plastic. And so, so they do think these fibers are fake, and they're worried about that. Consumers say they're looking for fiber, but they're not finding it. And if you ask them how much fiber was in their salad, they'll tell you 3 to 5 grams. And when the lettuce salad really doesn't have that, so we need to do a better job educating and actually providing the foods that really do bring home the fiber. The Healthy People 2010 said that their goal was that we would have 75% of the population consuming 2 servings of fruit and 3 servings of vegetable. Well, we missed the boat, surprise, surprise, and we didn't meet the goal. 32% of us eat the fruit serving of 2, not what's recommended on the plate, just 2 servings. 26% ate 3 servings of vegetable. 10%, under 10%, met the whole grain goal. For the legume people in the room, the per capita consumption of legumes you all did today at lunch is 3/10 of an ounce or 8 grams. I mean, it's really pathetic. And even then, that's not really the per capita consumption because it's very, the Hispanic population has quite a lot. The Asian population has a little more. Maybe if you live in the Southwest, you have a little more, but a lot of people don't eat very much of that. So, and if we look at the guidelines overall, depending on which age and gender group you're looking at, 3 to 8% meet all the dietary guidelines. So we're getting, we talked about evidence-based grades, and I don't even need to do an evidence-based, that's an F, and it's a big time F. So commonly consumed foods in the United States have 1 to 3 grams per serving. The greatest fiber contributions in the diet are potatoes and refined grains because they're done frequently. We need to increase dietary fiber. That's one of the things that the dietary guidelines suggest. And we need to do that without increasing calories. So we need to limit or replace options that are low in fiber with those that are higher in fiber. And we need to consider all sources of fiber because if we take, there's some studies out there where they actually took oatmeal and they added beta-glucan to the oatmeal. And so for roughly, with just a little bit of increment in calories, you got double the fiber. And I think we have to look at all strategies since we're so far away from the mark. This happens to be, I did a paper for Nutrition Today with Allison Dilzer and Marie LaTulip. And she actually asked her friends to give them some typical diets. So this is a typical college male. And so it's not a great diet. It's not a terrible diet. And it has a lot of calories, but, you know, college males, it's the one time in your life that men can eat whatever they want and not really consider the calorie consequences. And so what we just simply did is tried to use a combination of added fiber and make some changes in terms of other fiber. So you can see that what we did is we used a double fiber bagel. So you could decide what fiber that might be. It might be your, there are sweeteners that have fiber added. So we could have a soluble fiber there. There is, again, a double fiber bread. So just taking what this person is already eating, I mean, clearly we could make this diet better, but we were just taking what this person was already eating. Here we have a whole wheat roll with double fiber. We did add a cup of strawberries that had a little bit more fiber than the watermelon. We added almonds and bran crackers and vanilla ice cream. We brought the calories down just a little. That wasn't really our objective, but we doubled the fiber. And so that's just one way to show that while I'd love to go in and say, you know, look, you don't have enough vegetables, you don't have enough fruit, probably have too much fat, but Joanne and I talk about, we do all this talk about diet and nobody changes. So we want to continue talking about diet, but we also want to see are there other ways we can get there. So and then I'm going to just talk a little about Synergy. This is a randomized controlled trial with 50 overweight, with 46 overweight women over 50. And they fed either a whole grain wheat barley legume mix or they fed a whole grain wheat mix. And they had the fibers were pretty well matched. The one had a little bit more. Both of them reduced the cholesterol, but the combination was more effective in terms of cholesterol reduction than the single source. And again, that goes back to it's like the variety and moderation thing that we always try to do in nutrition. And the combination of fibers did better on blood pressure and had more fermentation. I know Bruce told me this wasn't really a Synergy study, but if you compare these two where the fibers are the fiber amount's roughly the same, when you had just the supplement, you got some good health outcomes. When you had the supplement with this healthy pattern, you got more outcomes. And again, talking about we need to talk up a healthy diet, but we also need to look at other things, the isolated fiber together with the intrinsic fiber. And then these are science-supported benefits to added fibers. This is a thing that Joanne Slavin and I put together. And so with that, We need to convince people that the illness that they have is due to something they didn't eat. Everybody on the news talks about it was the X that you ate that made you sick, and we need to talk about it's the fiber that you didn't eat that's contributing to the problem. So all fibers fit, natural, intrinsic, and otherwise, and there's a growing body of evidence that continues to support the Vahouny 9, giving us more and more data that added as well as innate fibers have documented physiological benefits. Fiber is a nutrient of concern. Few consume the recommended levels, and we need to meet that by adding fiber to foods to make realistic and simple changes in the way we address this, and we need to control calories. So with that, I'll turn it over to John.